Well, if you were to tell me that in 2022, the Santa Claus with Tim Allen would be returning for an original show only on Disney Plus, I would be like, you're crazy. There's no way they're bringing back those films back into the modern day. And they did. And it worked out pretty well. And as a really big fan of the original films when I was a kid, I was very, very happy with what they produced. And I can't wait to talk about it. So, hey everyone, this is Joe here for What's in the Tube. And welcome to our Santa Claus Season 1 episode review. Well, actually, the Santa Claus is. I forgot. It's the whole family this time around. Oh my God. I'm so in disbelief because if you've been living under a rock for the past 2-3 years now, Disney Plus has been a great outlet most times of bringing back older franchises from Disney's past, whether that was in the 80s, the 90s, or now even just the 2000s, where they come back into the modern day, either in a new film or a new TV show or something in that line, and they kind of like just give us a breath of nostalgic air back, coming back to those universes, seeing how the characters are. And for me, like, I never expected the Santa Claus to be part of that list. I never did. And when they announced it early this year and that it was happening, Tim Allen was going to return, basically almost everyone from the original cast that were in the films came back when asked, and I was like very, very happy on that. And then finally getting to see the show after 5 weeks of episodes was great. It was great to see. But just to give a little insight on my history of the Santa Claus, I've been a fan since the second movie because I was born in 97, so I did not watch the first film live as it came out. I skipped that over. Even after I became conscious to know the movies, I never watched the first movie until way after the fact. I think it wasn't until I was a teenager before I finally saw the first movie at long last, which... to talk about the first movie for a bit, which that movie was just a very simplistic movie. It definitely was not trying to be like, we're doing a franchise. This definitely was just a singular story. This was just trying to tell the story of a man who just became way too obsessed with his work, ignored his son, and eventually finds himself becoming the new Santa Claus. And just all the hilarious hijinks that ensue, and all just the commotion that he's causing around town as he's slowly trying to accept that, yeah, you're Santa now. You have a much bigger purpose to play now, not just in the life of your own son, your own child, but to all the children around the world. Going back to it, like, because I rewatched all the films again before doing this. Rewatching that first film, it definitely was an inclination for me that, that was mainly trying to be a father-son story, where Scott Calvin and his son have become a little bit distant since him and his wife divorced, and then also him being like a little bit more too obsessed in his job, giving less and less time for Charlie, that on Christmas Eve, when he's trying to be a decent dad, which is not really working because everything keeps going wrong between them, he finds himself facing with destiny when he accidentally, quote unquote, knocks Santa off the roof of his house, killing him, disintegrating him, and thus, once he becomes part of the red coat, putting on the entire suit, he becomes the new Santa Claus inadvertently. Even by the time he gets back to the North Pole, in disbelief the fact there is a Santa Claus, there's a North Pole, there's elves, there's sleigh with reindeer. Like, he's just believing everything is just malarkey. This is not true. None of this is true. It's just probably I'm high on something. They probably poisoned me or something at the Denny's, and I'm just having a deliberated dream. But besides that, he is Santa Claus now, and throughout the next year of his life, he slowly becomes physically Santa Claus, gaining the beard, gaining the belly, all that sort. However, he's still not accepting of it. He does not want to be Santa Claus. He wants to go back to his life, maybe try to improve his relationship with his son, but overall, he does not want to be Santa. That's just something he does not want to do. That by the time we get to more later on in the year, he's slowly accepting the fact that it's not just about being Santa. It's about being that symbol of joy and happiness that all children around the world look forward to at the end of the year. Because it's not just about presents, it's about happiness and joy. So once he finally learns about that, as well as dealing with his ex-wife and her new husband, assumptions that he's becoming this obsessed pervert who's attracting kids by being Santa Claus, he manages to accomplish for all that, repairs his relationship with Charlie, and even though he's about to embark on a new job that will take him extremely further away from his son, they both understand like this is part of a larger destiny, that this is his true calling, that he's just meant to be Santa. And we leave off that first film just kind of like on the hopefulness that like, it'll be all right between them. That nothing will happen. So by the time we get to the second film, which is the one I watched so many times, I feel like every Christmas since I got that original DVD copy, I've seen it maybe 2 to 3 times per Christmas season. It was just so good. It was just really amazing, and it was definitely the most colorful for me, the most funniest. It became the most heartwarming of the franchise, despite it being a little bit dated, in my opinion. I mean, all these films are dated, just being honest with you. Even they make fun of that in the new show. But by the time we roll into the second movie, where it's been 8 years since the first movie, and Scott's really doing well as Santa. He's, I think, become the best Santa in history. However, once again, his responsibilities as a father is being shrunken because he can't be there that often. He's only available at certain periods. And Charlie's kind of like embarked on this more naughty, more, rebellious path as he enters high school. And it gets to the point where, like, the only reason why Scott knows about this is because eventually he gets on the naughty list, which is a big no-no for Scott. Because, like, how do you even imagine explaining that my son, I'm Santa Claus, and my son is on the naughty list? Like, how do you, it's not embarrassing, but it's also, like, eye concerning for him. So, and on top of that, he discovers there's another clause to the Santa Claus that he put on many moons ago, where there is a Mrs. Claus, where he needs to find a wife before a certain point. Otherwise, he cannot be Santa anymore. That entire thing was like, okay, now you're really stretching for the win, because, like, you're going to have to explain, like, where's the other Mrs. Claus that was the wife of the previous Santa Claus? Where's she? They never really explained that or really talked about that. But, again, there was enough on Scott's mind, like, okay, I got to not just, fix Charlie and make sure he's back on the right path. I also got to find a wife before Christmas Eve. Which I'm like, it just passed Thanksgiving. You're telling me this man has a month to find his true love, make her move all the way to the North Pole to become Mrs. Claus in a month. Like, Scott at least had a year the last time around to accept the fact he's Santa Claus. And he's going to have to convince someone that you're going to have to be Mrs. Claus and move all the way out here in a month. Yeah, that's, as crazy as that premise sounds, it's still, somehow it worked out. Like, just that crazy premise alone, it worked out. And by the time we got into the film itself, just seeing just the dynamic between, Scott being back into the real world after so long, his dynamic with his ex-wife and her husband, his niece, which is kind of weird. It's Charlie's sister, half sister. It's the daughter of his ex-wife and her new husband's creation, but she considered him his uncle. This is a very weird family, but again, it's all love over here. And then him coming into core with Carol, which obviously will be his wife because, Christmas, Carol, get it? Yeah, my puns are just not great today, to be honest with you. I apologize. But regardless of that, by the time we get to more and deeper in the film, and, it's a very slow progress. It definitely is at times a little rushed, just how fast they've went. But the thing is that, that's just how it is. Sometimes love comes out of nowhere. It's quick. It's also long. You just really don't know. And, by the time the main conflict arrives, because, like, on top of all this, what else can go wrong? They also have a month out before Christmas. There's a lot of deadlines they have to reach, and if Scott's going to be all the way back in Chicago focusing on finding a wife, how is he going to finish up his prep work being Santa? Well, what you do is you create a toy copy of yourself. So Toy Santa comes in, which is basically Tim Allen being the most comedic, most weirdest thing on the planet as a toy Santa. And my God, that's just so hilarious. And always since I was a kid, I wanted to touch that beard. I wanted to, like, squeeze that rubber beard. I don't know why. It's just something I have to mention right now. It's like literally the only opportunity I'll be able to get to that. So yeah, so by the time we get to the end of the movie and we're like, just seeing Toy Santa becoming basically a dictator, enslaving the elves, believing that every children in the world is naughty and they all should deserve coal, regardless of what was going on with Carol and Charlie. He has to head back to the North Pole. But thankfully, everything turned out for the best. Carol initially was in disbelief that he was Santa Claus, but Charlie shows her the magical snow globe from the last movie, which is enough to convince her that, hey, no, my dad's telling the truth. Like, there's a world of magic here that, he's not lying. He's not trying to, like, deceive you or anything. It is the truth. And he really would need you right now. And Again, like this is like giving the first time we actually get like an action scene in the Santa Claus films, and I'm just like, oh my god, I love this so much. It was just so, the perfect one of like they were trying to be suspenseful, but they're all elves doing a big fight scene, and even like Scott fighting toy Santa in the air with the reindeers, and also with riding a baby reindeer named, I think it was Chet, I believe, and I was like, oh my god, this is just so perfect. It really is. But it was still sincere. It was still like it had a story. It had like a lesson to learn. It definitely had heart in it. And by the time we rolled credits on the second film, I was like, I want to see more. I do want to see more. Like, you know. And then eventually the third film came out, and that happened. The third film happened. It definitely was a movie. I believe it was the first time that I actually agreed with what the critics say, because I'm usually the type of person, even as a kid, like I don't believe what other people say. Like I want to watch it for myself and get my own opinion of the project. But no, by the time we got to the third movie and everything, my issue was that it just didn't have the heart. It didn't have the soul. It just felt like that. Okay, the second movie did so well. Let's make a third one. And okay, what else can we do? Okay, let's do something called the escape clause. It's not that, you know, catchy, and the only reason they called it the escape clause because the original second movie was going to be called the escape clause, so they decided to reuse it for the third movie. And it just didn't really have a purpose to it, you know. It kind of just felt like what another Santa year could have just been like. It didn't really need to be a movie. They try to keep things fresh, going with casting Martin Short to be the villain as Jack Frost, which, as much as I like Martin Short, he is a very funny actor. His Jack Frost was kind of like annoying to me. It never really made me chuckle. It never really made me feel him like he's a villain or anything. He's just like an obstacle. Or just a pain in the ass. I feel like that was the first time I mentioned someone like being a pain in the ass. And so like, I definitely know what they were trying to do with this. Like definitely the theme here was family, like, you know, found family, new family, main family. I know what they were trying to go for. It was just the way they executed things that it just didn't really hit me. The comedy just didn't hit me at time. They sadly got rid of Bernard, which I'm like, that's a big damn shame. But yeah, it just didn't feel like it. Like, you know, I feel like even though like the last one we focused more on Scott and Carol, there was still the underlying, you know, Charlie connection there. And Charlie wasn't even in this film that much. He was only in the beginning and the end. So it really wasn't something that I was really feeling attached to, really. And the only reason why I would pop in the Santa Claus 3 DVD was because of the Ali and AJ music video, which I'm like, that is the best. That is the Christmas song for me. That will always be playing in my house every Christmas, like undoubtedly. Without complaints there. But regardless of the fact, like, yeah, I do see what they were trying to go for with the third movie, giving Scott and Carol their next challenge of like, well, Scott's next challenge of like, you know, being a father again, this time having to take all the lessons he learned with Charlie and all the mistakes he made with Charlie, the lack of trying to be there for him and trying to like, you know, solve it to when his new son is born, like, you know, so he doesn't repeat those same mistakes. Spoilers, he will sometimes make those mistakes because every time Tim Allen plays a character, he always makes mistakes. It's just unavoidable. So by the time after we wrapped that up, and it was just, it did what it did. It didn't succeed well. Even Tim Allen himself didn't like the movie. He just did it for the paycheck, and he was under contract. I just felt like, yeah, we're never gonna get the Santa Claus 4. It's never gonna happen. This is the end of the universe, and yeah, I was perfectly accepting of that. This is just a trilogy that will never come to, and then come forward to this year, and yeah, we're back. We're back with 6 new episodes, which basically is just like an extra hour of a movie, just with a TV budget. So going into it, which again, this will involve spoilers. So if you haven't seen the Santa Clauses on Disney Plus, go check it out right now. For me, my quick spoiler-free impression is that it's a good show. It's really good. Some things didn't really make sense of it. It definitely was held back a little bit on like the TV show. It didn't have really the best transition from movie to TV, in my opinion. But I do respect the fact that they tell a shorter story and they kept everything tight and concise, and, you know, they didn't stretch out anything that needed to be stretched out. But yeah, so I would recommend it, period. So going into like the actual show itself, I didn't even know what I was getting into with this one. I really didn't know like what was the story, what was the real premise. The trailers didn't really give it anything away, which was pretty good. It was just like, Tim Allen's back as the Santa Claus, made by the guys who made Last Man Standing. Tim Allen's back. That's all you needed, and I was immediately in. So by the time we get through the entire show and everything, It's been many, many years since the events of the third movie. Scott has been Santa now for almost 30 years, which is crazy to say. Not just his son, Cal, Buddy, which is who now it goes by Cal, has grown up to a teenager. They also had a new daughter called Sandra. And basically the film kind of explores the aspect of, okay, so what happens now? Scott has his entire family there. It's actually the first time a family has lived on the North Pole. Like, kids actually growing up at the North Pole. It's just never been done before. It's never been done before, weirdly enough. And also, it's once again kind of like going back to the 90s a little bit with like the first film. Like, it thankfully took the best parts and the best ideas of the first two movies. We don't talk about the third one. And kind of like, how do we bring that into the modern world where, yeah, once again, Scott is facing changing times that, we have the social media is on the rise. Kids aren't really believing in the magic anymore. Like, Santa isn't really something that is inclined to be believed in anymore. And he's slowly losing his powers. Even like the Christmas before the Christmas that the main film occurred in, he's slowly losing his powers. Like, he's cutting it kind of close. Like, every year he just cuts it closer and closer. He's just, the power and the magic are not there anymore. It's alarming to notice. Eventually, almost when one time he gets into an accident, which was kind of similar to when the last Santa Claus nearly got into an accident. He has that scare, and he gets convinced, like, okay, I think it's time for me to retire. Ready to pass on the Santa hat and coat to the next person who's going to be Santa. And the elves are all in agreement, even though they're gonna miss him to heck. They know, like, okay, it's probably just time for Scott to go. It's been almost 3 decades. It's time for him to, like, kick the caboodle a little bit and actually, get to spend time with his family. Which the thing that they were saying in the third movie, like, Scott didn't want to repeat the mistakes of not being there for his family. Like, he is there at times, but it is more of the times of, like, he's just focused. He has to focus on the work. Like, there's always so much he can do, and yeah, thankfully they have the mom there, but it's only, again, like, his presence also counts, and it kind of makes Scott, Cal and Sandra a bit isolated to what, how things are. They didn't really have like a regular childhood. Cal mostly fell into the world of VR, just like seeing other realities and other worlds that are out there, and Sandra is mostly attaching herself to animals and just all the creatures that live around them in the North Pole. And so they're definitely not living a normal life. And even that's echoed when we get back to Charlie, which Charlie, oh my God, he's grown up. Like, I feel so old. Like, we literally seen him grow up. He has his own wife now. He has 2 kids, and they're living a great life. And Scott was kind of hoping that he would just pass on the torch in the family, pass it on to Charlie, make him be the new Santa. Have him do it. And Charlie's like, yeah, that was a great childhood dream I had, but as I got older, as he got a wife and his own family, he realized that, yeah, the North Pole is just not the best place to raise kids. And even Scott, like, takes that as an insult. Like, well, I got Cal and Sandra, so what are you calling them? It's like, oh no, they're great, but it's just, don't you wonder that, like, they never had like another human to human interaction? They've only been with elves and creatures and you guys. Like, not to say that's a bad thing, but you kind of need that sociability. You kind of need, like, the outside factor of, like, meeting other people to kind of, like, grow naturally and stuff. Otherwise, you're gonna come out as awkward. He's not wrong. He really isn't. It definitely kind of gives Scott a wake up call. It's not just him retiring is what he needs to worry about. It's like his family also needs to have like a proper life. Not being confided to like the duties of Santa and everything. So definitely he knows, like, okay, that moment's gonna come. And then we enter in Cal Penn's character, who plays Simon. I was gonna say Simon Cowell, but I'm like, no, that's not right. But his name is Simon. Another SC like Scott, like, Scott Calvin, and then we have Simon C. I forget his last name. Who the elves were kind of looking at him as like a potential successor. Being a man of delivery, being a man of commerce and everything. They think of him as to be at least good enough replacement for him. That's kind of like the man they're going for. He also has a daughter similar to when Scott and Charlie were together. Simon and his daughter are also together as well, and by the time they get recruited to, like, audition for it, at first Scott's like, I don't see the energy in you, I don't see the magic in you, this isn't gonna work out really. They even brought them to the North Pole for an audition, which I know, like, well, isn't that a bad thing for the Secret Santa? Which I'm like, apparently no. They have this memory eraser dust, which they can bring anyone they want. They'll just forget about it the next moment they get out of it. But eventually, when something happens with Scott's daughter and Simon's daughter, that brief bonding-ish experience was enough to convince Scott, like, okay, you're Santa now. You're going to be Santa. And Simon's like, okay, I'll be Santa. Not the most enthusiastic person in the world, but like, yeah, that's kind of how it starts. Scott and his family head back to Chicago to start a brand new life. Kind of like pick things up where they left off for some of them, especially for Carol, which her story in the last two movies were like, it wasn't really like she got her own like story to tell. Like, I think the third movie, like, one of the advantages was like her expressing the fact of the isolation of being Mrs. Claus. Like, yes, she has her partner, yes, she's gonna have her kid, but she doesn't really have the other type of like real interaction that she was craving for. And then yeah, like by the time we get to this one, like she's made sort of buddies with one of the head elves, and you know, it's even still a bit of like, it's not exactly what she wants, but she's making the best of the situation. That by the time she comes back to Chicago, she like immediately goes back into like where she was back in the second movie, where she is this like hard ass principal. Everyone likes her, you know, like she's just getting all these like reunion, you know, meetings where like she's meeting colleagues that were there back in the early 2000s, and you know, Carol's just so happy like she has a purpose again, because but before they even thought about everything with the whole, you know, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, there's a new Claus. So we had the Santa Claus, we had the Mrs. Claus, we had the Escape Claus. Now there's the Succession Claus, which, yes, as the title says, Scott can vacate the role not by time travel, but just vacate the role by giving the title to another worthy person. So yeah, so even before the Succession Clause was even like a known thing, she mentions the fact that like, yeah, what has Mrs. Claus really contributed in the history of the North Pole? She's only made cookies and supported her husband and been in the background of photos. That's basically it. It isn't something that she wants to, she's not really been a big fan of anymore, and she's doing it because she loves her husband, but it has been draining over the years that by the time they get back to Chicago, everyone but Scott is like living, you know, kind of like this great new life, you know. Cal, which is also going by, you know, Calvin Buddy or Buddy Calvin, he finds love, or he finds like a love interest. Sandra finds, you know, a group of people that actually share her love into animals. And, you know, Carol's kind of sliding right back into like, you know, being, working in the school, like actually, you know, making her presence known and helping the next generation of kids. And she's loving that. But Scott is yet to find a calling beyond Santa. It's not really something that, you know, he's finding. At first he's just like focusing on his family, like, okay, he's just going to be the stay-at-home dad and like, you know, just be there for his family, like make up for lost time. But by the time they kind of all branch off to do their own things, you know, Scott's just there, just sitting back, like, you know, like, okay, I know I had my moment in the sun, now it's everyone else's turn, but it's just the question of like, what do I do now? What's my purpose? What's my calling? And meanwhile, back in the North Pole, it's clear as day, Simon. And honestly, this show had like a pretty good, like, setting the bar weirdly on expectations, because I thought the entire show was going to be about, you know, Simon proving his worth slowly, probably like, I don't know, like maybe he's an old friend of Scott's and they reunite, and then eventually Scott sees like the potential in him, but it wasn't until the end of the season where Simon becomes Santa. That's kind of like where we would hypothetically have a season 2 with Simon being Santa, Tim Allen passing on the torch. But no, Simon is kind of like, you know, trying to modernize being Santa, like having Christmas every day. And if Sesame Street taught us everything, that is a horrible idea. It is a bad idea. But he does not care because he's a man of science. He still doesn't believe in the magic. Heck, the red coat even walks away from him during the first day, which I'm like, yeah, even he knows, like, yeah, even the coat knows, like, yeah, this isn't Santa. This isn't someone I trust to be Santa. But yeah, regardless of that, yes, but slowly but surely, they also found out that they also showcased that there is an orb that sustained the magic, the Christmas magic, and it's becoming more and more corrupted as the years pass, especially when Simon takes over. It becomes even more darkened, elves start disappearing, and they all realize, yeah, we all made a mistake. Scott should not have retired. This was not his time. But Scott doesn't want to uproot his family, kind of put them back in the North Pole, because that would be unfair to them. But then we get the return of Bernard, which I'm like, Bernard, you've aged like fine wine. We missed you so much, man. Even we get an explanation to where he's been up to since the second and third movie, because like, that was the big thing. He just disappeared. What happened to him? Well, apparently after the events of the second movie, there was some sort of winter event. He disappeared. He found love, and then he gave up his immortality to have a life with her, which is kind of sincere. Like, you know, that Bernard got a happy ending. You know, it's not just And again, Bernard was the only like tall elf of the group, so I'm like, it was gonna become kind of difficult to them for them to explain like, why is Bernard and Curtis the only two people that are actually growing on the North Pole? Like that was just a bit confused. But they gave that explanation, and it was great for him to come in, you know, kind of explain more of like the mythology of this universe's, well, actually the universe's take of Santa Claus, where apparently this has all been planned out. This has all been like kind of prophesized, where the previous Santa, which we saw briefly in the first film, he didn't die by an accident. It was all on purpose. He knew that things were changing and that they needed a outside perspective for the name of Santa to survive even longer. So they decided to recruit a human, and they chose Scott Calvin, who, yeah, even though he was a snooty businessman that, you know, was at first not caring about Christmas, in his heart, in his passion, they knew like, yeah, this is the right person to be the new Santa. He was the first human Santa Claus. He was the first person to actually don the red coat that wasn't a magical being, and they didn't know how it was gonna work because, like, again, what happens when you give a human that power? And it kind of gives to the purpose of like, it's a retcon that I accept. I don't think it's perfect, but definitely they are trying to like, you know, give much more credence to the fact that like, Scott is probably the best Santa that the world's ever have. And, you know, there will be eventually a time where Scott isn't Santa properly. There is going to be that moment. But right now, like, Scott is the best. And that even though their experiment didn't have the best of footing that it was going to work out, there was no guarantee. It did. And, you know, it just showcased in his work in the many, many years since he became the Santa, like, yeah, he's the best. He is absolutely the one that all the elves appreciate, all the elves, like, really connect to. And, like, yeah, like, you know, him not being in the position anymore, he left too early, and, you know, his time's not now. And by the time he realizes that and he comes back, that's kind of where the series kind of dips for me. I will admit that. I feel like the last episode is kind of like, you know, okay, the stretch marks are there where, yeah, Simon's become really too cartoony villain, not listening to reason. God separates himself from his family to protect them, but then we have to go for this entire subplot, which again is serviceable to Sandra's story and Buddy's story too, but it isn't really like, it kind of felt like we were really trying to like stretch for the weeds here. That by the time we get back to, you know, Scott back in the North Pole with his final confrontation, which again, one of the stupidest things I feel like the elves have done were, and why didn't they shrink down the toy soldiers from the second movie? They just kept a few of them in a closet, which I'm like, why? Of all things, now that was a great throwback. I honestly thought they were going to bring back Toy Santa, but I'm like, yeah, no, definitely that wasn't the case. But still, whose bright idea was it just to throw them in a closet and just hope to God they never get reactivated? Whose idea was that? I really don't know. But and the ending kind of just felt like a little bit rushed. I feel like everything was perfect, or at least good enough, except the ending was rushed. I didn't really understand how a hug and how just saying a lesson allowed Scott to like reactivate everything with his with his magic. I do understand where they were trying to go for with that, but however, it for me it felt a little flat. Again, it was similar to the third one where I get where they were trying to go with that. I'm getting like, you know, this is meant to be a family story and how family is important to everyone. I do get what they were trying to go for here, but my only issue was like, it just didn't really, it wasn't coherent enough. It wasn't really well tied together to, like, even for 6 episodes, it just felt like they were stretching a little bit. Like, they didn't really give us enough explanation time to really explain, like, why did this work? Like, okay, yeah, last movie where Lucy, Scott's niece, gave Jack Frost the magical warm hug. That's a stretch. I could see why it would work, but it's still a pretty big stretch. This was an even bigger stretch where like all of his magic gets restored because he learned the power of family and like the importance of Christmas with family and everything. I kind of get where they were going for here. It just was really much more stretched out than it had to be. But yeah, but the show ended kind of on an open note. Like, you know, they kept everything open for like, it wasn't like a definitive like, you know, epilogue of the movies. It wasn't. It's not trying to be that. It's not trying to be a fourth movie. It's definitely trying to be like just the continuation of a story, many years after the last installment. And I feel like they did a pretty good job overall. I don't think it's the best one of like the 4. It definitely falls probably under second, which is still pretty good. Like between 4 projects, it's still in the upper enchilada, but it was just still like that ending was just not great. It was like, you know, like I get the idea. It was just not great for me whatsoever. But however, it does leave everything open to like possibilities to like what season 2 will bring, because there is a season 2. I was actually surprised that they renewed the show for season 2. I thought this was going to be a close-ended, you know, one-time miniseries, but no, we're coming back next Christmas, hopefully, for another round. Which, if they decide to do Santa Claus every single year, I'd be down. I'd be down to do it. But for this first season, bringing them back into the modern era, they did such a good job on it. They really did. I really miss this franchise a lot. I really did. And, just the fact that I got to see it again. Tim Allen ages like fine wine. He still looks good after so many years on duty. That I'm really happy about that. And I really cannot wait to see where they go more with it. Getting to see the rest of the cast again, seeing Carol again, seeing Bernard again, seeing Charlie again. And the new cast all pulled their weight pretty well. I do believe Simon is probably my least favorite villain of the franchise. Well, villain, quote unquote. Even Jack Frost is a little bit more amusing in my opinion, but that's apples to potatoes right over there. But again, yeah, for me, I wholly recommend it. So if you haven't yet seen the Santa Claus yet, the first season, it's a really great, fun Christmas treat for the family. I think you'll have a fun time with it. It definitely is something you can jump into after the movies, or you don't even need to see the movies. You could just jump in from the get-go. I feel like this is just a good introduction point for newcomers of the franchise. And yeah, that's great to see, and I can't wait to see what more they'll do with this. So for me, I'm giving this season 2 thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below, what did you think of the Santa Claus's first season? Let's start a conversation down below, and I believe that's going to do it for me today, ladies and gentlemen. So if you're unaware, this has been What's the Two from ActionX, reviewing the first season of the Santa Claus. If you want to know what we're doing normally, What's the Two besides this one-off season review. We're doing a lot of other new shows in the new year, but mainly right now we're doing Doom Patrol, so go check that out right now on youtube.com/ActionX videos. But however, this has been the show. Please subscribe to us on youtube.com/ActionX videos. Ring that bell for notification when our next review is live. Please also like, favorite, share, follow on the socials. And until we see each other again, happy holidays. Have a great, whatever you celebrate, have a great New Year's. And, keep the magic alive always. And, and just remember, hugs don't always solve everything, but I guess sometimes they do. Can't explain it. But until next time, peace out.